In today's video, we're talking about classical music and its place in society. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. My name is Carola and I moved to Paris in 2017, and in today's video I'm with my friend Kayla.
Hi. So I do many things, one of which is I'm a classical singer, so opera, things like that. The second one is that I run a business about classical music and introducing it to new people through products, educational products for all ages that you can print and download, and lots of other content through the website as well.
Let's talk a bit about how we both started to be interested in classical music. What's your story?
I didn't grow up with classical music. I grew up in quite a low socioeconomic area, and I was surrounded by many other genres of music. So classic rock, Christian pop music, Maori waiata in New Zealand where I'm from, all sorts, R&B and hip hop. And my family were always musical, but we didn't grow up with classical music around. It was later, when I was about 15, that I got interested in it. I was homeschooled as a child, and then when I turned 15, I went to public school for the first time. And at that point, I was able to learn music as a subject at school, went to my first opera, started learning every instrument I could, and joined all the groups that I could. And it was all go from there.
My father studied music, so classical music was always in our home, and as a child I had these audio cassettes that were talking about the life of famous musicians, and I especially loved listening to the one from Bach and Mozart. So I knew everything about their life, and I could detect their music when it would be on the radio or on any of the classical CDs that all my family gave to me. But then I never got into actually playing an instrument. I really enjoyed more listening to it. And I think I went to my first opera, also as a teenager, but before that we had opera on television. So I remember that we had 5 different versions of the Magic Flute, from Puppeteer, Hallo Spencer, half an hour, to really 3 hours really recording from somewhere where it was sung. And I enjoyed that a lot. So if someone had asked me back then what was my favorite music piece, I would have probably said the Magic Flute. And yeah, I really enjoyed listening to it, but my parents also wanted me to learn some instruments, but I pretty much gave up everything. I remember giving up the violin because it just doesn't sound good if you're starting. And I remember giving up piano lessons after 2 times because we were all sitting in a row and I wasn't the one at the normal level. I had the very bass keys and I didn't enjoy that. So I never got into more than enjoying music. And pop music actually only started when I was 13, and suddenly everybody in the class started listening to pop music. But before that, it was classical music all around. I didn't even know any of the pop music.
So we're a bit the opposite in that way.
Yeah,
New Zealand is a sports country, so from the get-go it's rugby, netball, all those kinds of things. So unless you're born into classical music, it's unlikely that you're going to get that exposure.
Yeah. So how did it continue for you?
So after that I went to university. In New Zealand we do it slightly differently than they might do in places like Europe or the US, in that universities actually cover everything. So you'll have a conservatoire of music, conservatory, as part of the university context. So I first studied at the University of Waikato in Hamilton, New Zealand, and thinking back on it now, it was actually a great experience for just the real camaraderie between the musicians there. When I first started, there was a bit of a gap between the singers and the instrumentalists, but I ignored that completely and crossed over. So we learnt all the foundational things we needed to learn. We had already come in with some background, so some music theory and some knowledge of classical music works, and obviously our instruments that we were choosing to do, or composition, stuff like that. But yes, I did composition, classical music history, languages. I pursued some of my own special interests, so I did a paper in chamber music so chamber music is like small groups of instruments, but voice can be one of those instruments as well. which I really enjoyed doing that. There's some great repertoire out there that isn't performed enough. And then I did 2 years of postgrad at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, which is not the capital city, for those who are wondering. So there I completed my honours year and my master's year, and it kind of stepped me up another level professionally. I started working for the New Zealand Opera Company in their opera chorus, and I also went on to perform some principal roles and did competitions, sang all around New Zealand at that point. So that was the end of my New Zealand years. Then I decided I needed to move overseas, and I chose France as I already had an affinity for the French language. Unfortunately, when I got over here, I had my first very bad audition. We all have bad audition stories, and my one was definitely at that point. I don't recommend auditioning after 2 days of air travel. It's not a good decision. And I also came down with a sickness, I think it was the flu or something, and lost my voice for several months. So I was felt a bit lost already, being in a new country, new context, new language. I wasn't known here at all. So I had to kind of figure out my way from there a bit. I was working as a full-time nanny for 4 years, basically, between Paris and London. Taking private singing lessons where I could and performing where I could, of course. Not as evident as it might seem. And then I moved back to Paris from London in May last year, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was excellent timing. And my plan at that point was to begin pursuing classical music again as a full-time career, but the virus had other ideas. So I am back in it permanently, but it's just on a slightly different trajectory than I expected. But I've got some really exciting projects coming up for the coming year, which I can't talk about yet, but if you go on my website and sign up for my mailing list, you'll learn about it.
Yeah, link up here.
Yeah.
So we just had to move a little bit because the sun was getting too much in your face.
Hopefully no insects come flying out of us.
Yes.
How are your video editing skills?
Yeah, I can do like a drawn in B or anything, something like that.
That would be funny.
So that means you have had some experience in the professional opera world. What is that like?
Which aspect?
I don't know. Are there like divas? Are there popular singers? Are there stars? Are there people just getting by? How can I imagine that? Is that like pop music or totally different?
It definitely depends on the country that you're in and the city. If you're in a bigger city, there's going to be a lot more competition than if you're in a small town, for example. In New Zealand, generally, we all get on quite well. We support each other. We're all on Team Kiwi. We're just really proud of seeing anyone on our stages and on the international stages. We haven't really dealt with too much diva behaviour, not from the singers. Overseas, you can sometimes get a bit more competition and some diva behaviour backstage, some not very nice remarks made, but generally we all still do support each other because we know that this is a very tough career. In order to be a full-time opera performer, so performing in operas, contracted with opera companies, only maybe 5% of us can actually do that. The rest of us, we might have some contracts with opera companies throughout the year, but many of us do other things like we'll perform in concert situations, recitals, singing art song, which is a type of song for piano and voice, or oratorio, religious music, often with orchestra and choir. Yeah, so to make it in this career nowadays, unfortunately, it's becoming a lot more about the amount of money you can invest into it. Already we had to pay for training, and we have to pay for the pianists that we work with and all our audition materials, the things that we wear on stage, accommodation for competitions and auditions. But now more and more we're also being expected to complete pay-to-sing programs where we pay in order to have an opera role, and we will be guaranteed to perform that opera role, but we've paid to do it. We haven't actually been hired from just a purely equal footing framework. And also many places are now taking audition fees, so you have to pay in order to audition. And this is something that you particularly see in the classical music world. You don't see it anywhere near as much in musical theatre, for example, but unfortunately it's becoming more and more prevalent in the classical music industry.
Okay, that sounds actually pretty crazy because it's your job, and I'm assuming that someone is paying a ticket to actually go see you sing or hear you sing, and they expect you to be like part of the ensemble and not, I don't know, that sounds very crazy and
exactly
unfair.
Part of it comes down to the education system as well. There are too many singers being pumped out of the universities, being told that, one, that they're going to have a successful career as an opera soloist, and two, that if they do anything in music outside of opera, that they've failed their career basically. So you end up in some cases with maybe 800 singers auditioning for 10 positions in a professional opera company. So that's the level of competition that we're dealing with.
Okay.
Now what we're seeing is that because for bigger opera voices and louder, your voice takes longer to develop. And so there's a lot of people that give up on the career before they reach the point where they're really at their peak, because they're not getting hired and they're not able to pay the bills early enough, and so they just have to give it all up. And so what we're seeing now is that there are people asking, where are all the great opera performers like we had before? And I always say, you priced them out, they can't afford it anymore.
Yeah, pretty clearly.
There are definitely talented performers out there, and there are people who are pushing to improve these things, but it needs to happen faster.
What was the best audition you ever had, or the most successful one?
The best one that I had, I think, was for an opera festival in the town of Lucca in Italy, which is where Puccini was born. And we had some singers come over to New Zealand who run this festival, and I auditioned for them there. I sang a Mozart aria, and the environment that it was in really felt very comfortable. I felt like I sang well, and I just felt instant feedback, and the pressure was off from the people that were listening to me. I felt like it was performance rather than an audition. And after the audition, I felt like it had gone really well, and I got the call back, so that did go well. For me, as a mezzo-soprano singer, so you've got soprano, mezzo, contralto for female voices, I really enjoy singing some of the great mezzo roles like Charlotte from the opera Werther by Massenet. Lots of Mozart, even though I am often playing trouser roles, so being a teenage boy, but they're very fun to play. One of my favourite operas that I've done is called Trouble in Tahiti by Leonard Bernstein, and I sang the role of Dinah for that, which was a role I really connected with and enjoyed performing, and the music's great.
Okay.
Many other composers and operas and other works, but I could write a whole list. In fact, I do write entire lists.
Yeah, I'm often on your homepage or Facebook group, and then I'm trying to do the quizzes. And sometimes there are a lot of names that I've never come across, and all my life I'm usually the one who knows the most about classical music, so coming across a whole list of I've not heard about that one. Oh, there's a woman singer. No, not heard about that one. That is weird, because of course I never did it professionally. I never studied at university. Of course there's more out there, but I was never exposed to much more than what I learned by myself. So opera, I don't know that much, but classical music was certainly, I loved the Radetzky March from Strauss Senior, and then the Schöne Blaue Donau from Strauss Junior, even though these two actually they didn't get along that well. And then again Mozart, even though a lot of his works are a bit too provocative for me. So that was a shock for the 10-year-old Carola that, actually those texts aren't that great.
If they're provocative now, some of them imagine how they were for audiences back then.
Let's talk about what you do now, and your Facebook group and homepage and everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
So during the COVID crisis, I decided now was the time to start a business I'd always been wanting to be starting. So while I was in lockdown, I completed a business certificate so that I could plan out what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. I had always noticed that there was a big difference between people who had heard about classical music and had experience with it and people who hadn't. And I really wanted to do something to bridge that gap. That was the background that I had too, so I knew that there was a market missing there. I had also had the opportunity to have lots of conversations with people from all walks of life and to perform for them as well in many cases, and just seeing the look in their eyes when they realise classical music isn't just something that's for old people, for example, but it's something that can actually speak to them now and that has stories that are still relevant to today's world. So what I decided to do, partially from the nanny experience that I'd had and also from being homeschooled and realising I had a passion for education, was to create educational content. At the moment it's all online and the products that I make are in the form of downloadable ebooks essentially. They're workbooks, so there's text and there's activities to complete. And at the moment you just print and go. Ultimately there might be hard copy versions, but we have to see what happens. There's also lots of other content on the website, blog posts about all kinds of topics, YouTube videos and things like that, all curated for different age groups. The site caters for different age groups based on Montessori age groupings. So there's 0 to 6 year olds, 6 to 12, 12 to 18 and adults. There's quizzes, there's a Facebook group for people who are interested in the business and the topic and just want to talk about classical music, that they can engage there. And there are lots of exciting projects coming up. I'm going to be doing some exciting collaborations very soon, working on the second part of the online course that I've got going, an Introduction to Classical Music online course. And it's all developing very nicely and I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
I mostly like the quizzes, so that's what I'm mostly doing there, because I feel like, at first I thought, I'll totally get all of them, but now I'm really happy if I'm getting over 50% because sometimes the questions are really deep into
very niche.
Unknown. Yeah, very niche, very unknown, but I'm pretty happy if I'm doing a good job or if...
The purpose of the quizzes is generally not to necessarily do well, but to realise, I didn't know this, and then to go and seek it out for yourself, because I believe that learning should be something that you're passionate about and that you want to go and explore further on your own. I'm just there to give you the starting points.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of things to discover and there's always a link, so you could always click onto the person that you didn't know of and then find out more about them.
And it's for all levels of experience. You don't have to have any knowledge of classical music whatsoever. There's content for all levels, and if there's something that you think, that's a bit beyond where I'm at the moment, then there's plenty of stuff that is more for the newbies. But also if you just need a bit of extra help, just send me an email and I'll send you on your way.
Okay. Yeah, I know that you learned German just because you had to understand some of the music. What other languages did you learn that were just for the music that you actually had no intention of ever really speaking?
Well, I wouldn't say I never had the intention of it. Some of them I had the intention, but the intention just never quite came to fruition yet, but it will. So French was the first language that I became properly fluent in, and that was...
It helps living in France.
It does, exactly. Being surrounded by the language and having to speak the language makes a big difference for sure. It's not easy to learn a new language in adulthood, but once you get the keys to how to do it and you understand the basic structure of a language, especially if they're from similar language families, then it is a lot more straightforward.
What language did you learn at school?
None.
Okay.
At school. I began learning Spanish while I was homeschooled, but as my mum was the teacher and she didn't speak Spanish, that very quickly flew out the window.
Yes, yeah, I see.
I do speak basic Spanish now. I wouldn't be able to have a huge long conversation with you, but I can communicate. I communicated enough to survive in a Spanish hospital. So that was another level up at that point. When learning a language, there's always levels that you feel like you achieve.
Yeah, that reminds me of me being in France 2008 in Strasbourg, and yes, I had to go to the hospital and I had to explain in French while feeling super sick to the pompier what's actually wrong with me, and I managed to do that, and I didn't need anybody translating, so I realized, oh yeah, actually that works. I speak French.
Exactly. And it gives you like a little confidence boost. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be confident suddenly in every situation, but it means if I ever come across that situation again, I'll be fine.
Okay, but if you don't need to go to the hospital, don't try that out. That's not really the test.
Don't go there just to test out your language skills.
Exactly.
There are other ways. Other languages, so for opera we generally sing mostly in Italian, German and French. So I have the basics in Italian particularly. German I went a bit further. Italian I found actually has become a lot easier from learning Spanish and French, but I definitely am far from fluent, and a lot of my vocabulary is from 17th century Italian, so not particularly useful nowadays. I would like to become fluent at some point, but there are just too many languages and too little time.
Yeah.
I have sung in many languages that I don't speak at all, and for those I've had to sit down, learn the grammar and the pronunciation, listen to a lot of native speakers so I can get the flow of the language, and of course translate the words and make sure I know the verb conjugations, so when are we talking, who are we talking to, all the grammar things. I am now learning Russian, which I have always wanted to learn. There's so much great Russian repertoire, and I am at the point now where I can read through a Russian text, Russian poem for a song or an aria, and I can get through it. I don't understand everything, but I can pronounce pretty well the majority of things. So it's getting there. It's a very interesting language. All languages are.
Actually, if you want to go back and see both of us in a video from 2018, I can link it down below, because we've been friends since 2017, so Kayla has been there for my YouTube journey.
Sure have.
And well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's exciting to be able to get people excited about classical music. Go listen to something and then come back and tell me what you listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. Put that down in the comments. And if you liked the video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't, then please subscribe. Bye.
Bye.
Down on every Paris street, always something new to meet. Paris stands for all to see, with her ancient history.